I am Jim Hessler from Path Forward Leadership. Let's have a real conversation about virtual meetings. Now, meetings on Zoom or Blue Jeans or Teams are essential to our work now, our work from home. And that's not likely to change any time soon. And thank goodness for these technologies. They're much better than they used to be. And the abilities of organizations to conduct business online has great value, virtually has a great value to being able to stay connected, not only now, but well into the future. However, there are some unique challenges involved with meetings that are held this way. So let's talk briefly about some ideas about how to make these meetings more effective. We need to acknowledge that keeping people's focus in a virtual meeting is just inherently more difficult than in an in-person meeting. I'm sure many of you have experienced this kind of fatigue that comes from being on a virtual meeting for a long period of time. You can't kind of relax into a virtual meeting the way that you might into an in-person meeting. And so one of the keys is to understand that basic challenge. We have to work a lot harder to hear other people sometimes. We can't see their gestures. We're missing a lot of their body language that we might otherwise see. We're seeing a two-dimensional reputation of a human being rather than the whole person. So the first piece of advice I have about these meetings is to limit the duration and frequency of them. I mean, if your calendar is just fully wallpapered with virtual meetings, your head's going to explode. It's just too much to take an entire day of meetings, virtual meetings. I'm sure many of you have already experienced this fatigue. So that means our meetings have to be really good. They have to be worthwhile. They have to be concise. They have to be effective. I would also recommend that you always get plenty of refresh space, not only in the meetings. If it's a longer meeting, make sure you take breaks. And I would say longer breaks than you might normally take in an in-person meeting. And then between meetings, don't schedule your virtual meetings back to back to back. Get 15 minutes or 30 minutes in between these meetings, please. It's very important. Use the webcam so everybody can see one another. I've been in both kinds of meetings with clients now. I've been with several where people were allowed to kind of check out and just have their name up on the screen. I personally don't find that very helpful. It's a trust issue. It makes me wonder what they're doing and whether they're really paying attention. So I would argue if it's important enough for people to be invited to the meeting, it's important enough for them to be seen by the other participants at all times. I would argue that agendas are more important than ever, that they've always been important. But in this environment, you need to know what you're going to talk about. You need to tell people ahead of time what that meeting is for. And you need to move the meeting along, probably a little more quickly than you're used to. Now, one of the reasons agendas are important is because of the next point, which is we need to excuse people from meetings when they're not absolutely essential to the meeting. And only bring them in for the part of the meeting in which their contribution is necessary. And also let people come in to the meeting late if their agenda item is halfway through the meeting. Don't have them sit through a half-hour meeting issues that don't require their attention. So really be thoughtful. It's kind of a lazy thing to just send out an invitation to a bunch of people for a meeting. As facilitator of meetings, you need to think who needs to be there, how long do they need to be there. Now that brings up the next point, which is that you need to recap your meetings. You need to send out a summary of your meeting afterward. And here's the reason why. The worst reason in the world to be at a meeting is because that's the only way for you to find out what happened at the meeting. If you aren't actively contributing something in terms of ideation or information sharing, or if you're not part of a decision-making process that has to happen at that meeting, then you're really a stakeholder of that meeting without necessarily being a participant. Now, you can only have trust in that stakeholder status if you know you're going to find out what did happen at the meeting that might have affected you. So write good summaries, send out information after the meeting so that the people who are stakeholders don't have to necessarily be active participants in the meeting itself. And give good instructions on the technology. I still see people really kind of floundering with some of the basic technology issues around these. Maybe need to do a little more training, and honestly maybe need to hold people a little more accountable for learning what they need to learn about using these methodologies. So also, I think in meetings generally, this probably applies to meetings in the office as much as it does to virtual meetings. But people need to show up for the meetings on time. The meetings need to start on time, and they need to end on time. That's really a fundamental, and I think it's probably even more important now in the virtual meeting environment. And then I also think it's important that you hold people accountable more than ever before for digesting information that was sent to them prior to the meeting. So if you receive an email with a meeting request attached to it, and it also has a document that you need to read before the meeting, I think organizations need to step it up, because I still see people showing up for meetings and saying, well, I didn't get a chance to read that material before the meeting. What then happens is the meeting has to stop and catch everybody up on that information before the discussion begins. So accountability, crispness, efficiency. Meetings are important. They've always been important. I'm not telling you not to have meetings. I'm just telling you to have good meetings. So go have a good meeting. Thank you.